Are you actually in control of your choices, or are you just a genetic survival machine? It's a heavy question, right? Well, let's jump right into this explainer because today we are challenging literally everything you think you know about your own free will, your emotions, and your morality. Most of us walk around totally convinced that we're the authors of our own lives. But what if there's a hidden blueprint dictating our deepest desires and even our most seemingly selfless acts?
To figure that out, we are unpacking Robert Wright's absolutely fascinating analysis of evolutionary psychology. We're looking at the hidden biological drivers behind our everyday actions. The concepts we're exploring from his groundbreaking book, The Moral Animal, are going to fundamentally change how you view human nature.
Wright's central thesis is honestly a bit unsettling. He framed natural selection as this invisible architect, literally pulling our strings and calculating our moves behind the scenes, almost entirely without our conscious awareness. It's like a grandmaster playing chess, and we're just the pieces.
Section 1. A quiet scientific revolution.
To really wrap our heads around this new science, we first have to look at a massive paradigm shift that quietly overthrew 20th century academic orthodoxy. See, for a long time, the standard social science model completely ruled the academic world. This was basically the idea that biology didn't really matter at all when it came to human behavior. They thought the mind was just this passive basin, a totally blank slate just waiting for local culture to pour its shape into it. But the new Darwinian synthesis completely flips that on its head. It argues that the human mind has a very real inherent nature that is driven deeply by our evolutionary roots.
For decades, huge, influential thinkers like Emil Durkheim, the father of modern sociology, pushed this blank slate idea. He literally called human nature indeterminate material. Later on, behaviorists like B.F. Skinner were so convinced of this that they believed you could condition a human to be absolutely anything with enough positive and negative reinforcement. But modern Darwinian scientists are actively fighting this doctrine. They argue that emotions like sexual jealousy or a parent's fierce love for a child are absolutely not just cultural inventions. They're hardwired.
Now, this quiet revolution didn't happen overnight. It was actually a century in the making. It started all the way back in 1859 when Charles Darwin published The Origin of Species. But the human application, that was mostly ignored or just completely misunderstood for 100 years. It wasn't until the 1960s that biologists really started nailing down the math of social animal behavior. And then, boom, by the mid-1970s, this new synthesis exploded into the social sciences. It's a worldview shift on par with quantum physics, fundamentally altering our perception of everyday social reality.
Section 2. The deep human unities.
So instead of getting bogged down in how cultures look different on the surface, what clothes people wear or what specific gods they worship, evolutionary psychologists are looking at what connects every single one of us at our core. And we aren't just talking about basic anatomy here. We're talking about the biology of romance, marriage markets, friendships, family dynamics, even office politics. Evolutionary psychology touches on literally everything that actually matters in our daily lives.
And what they found is just staggering. Underneath the crazy quilt of global rituals and customs, there are these bedrock elements of human life appearing everywhere. People in all cultures worry about their social status. We all have a capacity for guilt. We all have a deep, ingrained sense of retribution and justice, that whole eye for an eye mentality. And yes, for sure, every culture has a universal tendency to gossip about the exact same kinds of things.
Think about it. Things absolutely didn't have to be this way. We could live on a planet where gratitude or shame just didn't exist at all, or where maybe only a few isolated tribes felt them. But we don't. As anthropologists note, we are bound by a dense and intricate web of human nature. Our shared evolutionary design explains exactly why people everywhere feel guilt in broadly predictable circumstances. Section 3. Tuning the mind's knobs.
All right, so how does our early environment actually interact with our genetics? Wright uses this brilliant metaphor to explain how human nature basically comes in two forms. First, our genetics give us the universal knobs of human nature, like the capacity for guilt or ambition. Next, as we grow up, our developmental program acts like a sponge, absorbing vital cues from our specific social environment. And finally, our adult mind is officially calibrated, turning that knob to a highly specific setting based on what it absorbed.
Let's make this concrete. Take two different people who both possess the genetic thirst for approval knob. Based on their early environments, one person's knob might get set to a really comfortable, self-assured level, while the other person's gets cranked all the way up into the massively insecure zone.
So if we want to know why you might feel crippling ambition or deep insecurity today, we first have to ask why natural selection made those traits adjustable to our environment in the very first place.
Section 4. Our hidden evolutionary motives.
So, if this is all true, why did it take us so long to figure it out? Well, it turns out natural selection is sneaky. It appears to have deliberately hidden our true selves from our conscious selves. We are completely oblivious to our deepest motivations. Evolution effectively hides our selfish, genetic survival strategies behind this warm, fuzzy illusion of morality. Think about it. If we consciously knew we were just acting to propagate our genes, we wouldn't be nearly as convincing when we try to persuade others of our noble intentions. We have to believe our own hype.
Now, hold on a second. Before we go spiraling down a deeply cynical rabbit hole, we need to pause here. It is absolutely vital we understand this philosophical boundary known as the naturalistic fallacy. Just because a behavior is natural or rooted in our evolutionary history does not mean it is good or that it's a legitimate moral compass. The naturalistic fallacy is the mistake of inferring what ought to be from what is. We cannot derive our basic moral values from nature's brutal workings. Nature is not a moral authority.
That being said, the evolutionary reality is still pretty stark. Things like altruism, compassion, and love, they absolutely have a firm genetic basis. But the bad news is, they did not evolve for the collective good of the species. No, our moral sentiments are actually used with brutal flexibility. They get switched on and off to serve our own genetic self-interest, often leaving us pathetically ignorant of how our own minds are misusing these noble feelings just to get ahead.
Section 5. Testing the ultimate gentleman. To really put this ruthless scientific lens to the test, we're going to look at the creator of the theory himself. Can the most profound moral dilemmas actually be explained by evolutionary advantage? To answer this, Wright uses Charles Darwin as his primary exhibit A. Darwin lived in Victorian England, and he was renowned as a man of massive civility and profound humane decency.
Darwin was, by all accounts, decent to a fault. As the critic Leslie Stephen noted, there was almost something pathetic in his simplicity and friendliness. Darwin supposedly suffered from an extremely overactive conscience, nagged by intense self-contempt if he ever felt he hadn't been perfectly kind to someone. He was the quintessential true gentleman.
It's the ultimate irony, right? The man who discovered the ruthless survival of the fittest was himself overwhelmingly gentle. Darwin didn't seem to reflect the bloody tooth and claw nature of his own theory at all. But actually, that extreme lack of brutishness makes him the absolute perfect guinea pig. Because if evolutionary psychology can explain the deep-seated morals of a man this famously gentle, well, it can explain anyone.
The reality is, despite his extraordinary humanity, his profound, deeply felt morality was still fundamentally a product of evolutionary design. His conscience, his immense guilt, his intense desire for social harmony, these were all intricate tools calibrated by his environment to help him navigate the complex social hierarchies of Victorian England. At the end of the day, even Charles Darwin was an animal, driven by the exact same hidden evolutionary engines as the rest of us.
As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a pretty provocative thought. If the ultimate gentleman's morals were just hidden tools of natural selection, how much of your own conscience is truly yours? When you feel guilt, empathy, or righteous anger, are you really the author of those feelings? Or are you just feeling the invisible pull of the moral animal within? It's a fascinating question, and one that definitely forces us to look in the mirror with entirely new eyes.